Okay, blues language is what we're talking about here today. And blues language, this is not the whole story of blues language, but this is some of the core of it, I think. The core of it is uh, getting kind of a minor sound and mixing that with a major sound. I'm not going to get hugely into the theory of it, just going to touch on it a little bit. But the basic idea is it creates tension by putting things together that aren't supposed to work. You know, that Mozart would have said, you cannot do that. It doesn't work. Um, Blues tries to push these things together and make them rub up against each other and accomplish something, create some tension that people like. You hear the tension and you think, ooh, that's interesting, but then you want to hear it resolved for the most part. And then when it gets resolved, you feel satisfied. You expect to hear something when you hear the tension introduced. It's like suspense. You think something's going to happen, and then something happens most of the time. Okay, so let's talk about the basic scale that's sort of at the core of blues. What most people learn first. First scale is minor pentatonic. So we will do G minor pentatonic. That's the lower octave out of an E position. It's 1, flat third, 4, 5, flat 7. Then it starts over at 1 again. 1, flat third, 4, 5, flat 7, and 1. And if you keep going, flat third again. And that's 4. Okay. But in this position, we have basically 2 octaves of it. So the minor pentatonic can sound good. Anybody who is creative with rhythm or inventive with melody in general can do a lot with the minor pentatonic. But most of the people that use it sort of rely on it to do all the work for them, I think. And they sort of look at it as, so this is good because there's no wrong notes. There are no wrong notes. That's true, perhaps, in a sense, but that's not the best way to look at it. Okay. There are a lot of ideas that can't be played using that scale. Okay, and people tend to be kind of lazy with it. Some people are great with it. John Coltrane could do a hell of a lot with it. And a lot of blues players and rock players can also do a lot with it. However, most of the time, blues players don't just stick with that minor pentatonic sound. The real blues players, Freddie King, B.B. King, these guys, Albert King, most of the time, this is getting a little closer to it. You see it in books called the blues scale. It's basically minor pentatonic plus an extra note. The 1, the flat third, the 4, the sharp 4, the 5. Okay. Or if you're going down, the 5, flat 5, 4, flat 3, 1. Okay. Okay. Sharp 4 going up, flat 5 going down. It doesn't really matter what you call it as long as you know where to find it. Okay. And what it sounds like. You'll see that in books. That's a way of getting a little bit closer to what the blues really is, because it's usually not merely minor pentatonic, not just that. But even that, it's still kind of far away from the real thing. If you just play those notes, it's going to sound like a 14-year-old warming up in a guitar store, and not like a mature musician playing actual blues. Okay. Now, the blues language, you get closer to it when you look at some of these blue notes. The blue notes are the flat third, the flat 7, and the flat 5 or sharp 4. Those are the 3 main blue notes, and I think of those as being notes that you have, there are notes around them that are between the cracks that sound better than those actual notes. So it's not so much that the flat 3 is wrong, it just sounds kind of weak, and there are more interesting things you can do with it. So if you've got this, you can bend it up part of the way to that, not all the way. Now, you can bend all the way up to it if you want. Sometimes you hear that on some records. Some blues players do that, but mostly they do that in between bend. You also can take the 2 and bend it not quite all the way to the flat third. Okay, so you got 2 notes around the flat third, slightly bent up and slightly bent to the flat third. Those 2 in between the cracks notes have a lot of feeling and flavor, and they're more interesting than the flat third by itself. And I tend to avoid that note. Let's see. Then you have the flat seven. Flat seven can work if you play it pure. In some situations, it sounds terrific. In others, it sounds lame. It, it's a, it's a situation where what you should do is use your ear and see what you think. I'm going to show you some things you can do with it, but sometimes you're going to want to just use it straight, and you're not going to need to do this stuff. It's very similar to the flat third. You can bend up to it, but not quite all the way from the sixth, so not all the way to that. You can bend all the way to it, and that sounds okay, but this is another option. Sounds kind of cool playing them back to back like that, the two variations. Then you can get up to the, let's see. That's bending not quite all the way up to the major seven. Okay. Okay. So basically, with the flat third and with the flat five, you can bend it up slightly sharp or bend up to it from below slightly, just slightly sharp, and you don't quite get to it. So, or rather, slightly flat. Okay. It's either going to be slightly above it or slightly below it. Those notes are more effective usually than the pure note. Flat seven, sometimes I use it. You just kind of have to hear it, see what it sounds like. It's more a question of look at what these other options are and see what they sound like and see what you can do with them, as opposed to don't do this. I mean, the idea is that if you start getting used to using those other notes, you're not going to want to use the pure note so much because it's not going to sound as good. Okay, now you've got the flat five or the sharp four. You can do that in between the cracks bending thing to get above that and below it to get to it. You can do that, and it's okay. But my taste is more running to resolving it all the way to the note instead of bending it slightly out of tune. So if that's your flat five, I like to go to the four. And I like to do it quick, but you don't have to. That's sort of my style. And then so it either goes down or up. Again, I like it quick, but rockabilly guys like that kind of sound. It just depends on what you're doing, what kind of music you're playing. It can be a grace note into the resolution note and make the grace note so quick that, well, that's really what a grace note is. You do it so quick that that note really kind of, you don't really notice it. It's more of an effect. It's like an ornament that kind of intensifies that. Okay, that's most of it. Let's see if there's anything I missed here, anything I meant to talk about. Oh yeah, the other thing is the slurs, okay? Articulation, the way you hit a note. Slurs are any time you play a note with your left hand and don't use your right. And so it's pull-offs and hammer-ons and bends and slides, okay? I don't find pull-offs and hammer-ons as useful as slides and bends, mainly because pull-offs and hammer-ons to me don't have an emotional intensity. They just seem to have a kind of an empty flash kind of quality. You know, some guys like Jeff Beck and Les Paul could do amazing, very effective things with extreme pull-offs and hammer-ons. But to me, the Jimmy Page is good at that too. A lot of other guys. To me, that stuff sounds gimmicky. It sounds the bending sounds more emotional, and sliding sounds more emotional to me. They sound more vocal somehow. So I go for those more. But pull-offs and hammer-ons can be very useful. Maybe the story that you're telling has a different kind of a sound from mine, and that's fine. You know, so be aware of them. But the main thing to understand is that the slurs are an essential part of playing the blues. You want to, when in doubt, try slurring into a note or slurring away from it and see whether that gives you an interesting other dimension. Okay, I believe that's it. Okay, Blues Language 101. There's a lot more to tell, but that's a big part of it, all that stuff.